So drinking creates dopamine. And with dopamine, there's a memory of the experience encoded in the brain. What's really interesting is that what's encoded in the brain is also what led you to the alcohol, that trigger. So whether that's the emotion that led you there, the stressful situation, right? The part of what's encoded is that trigger. Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your health coach and host, Jenn, here with you every week and every year for wellness without the weirdness. Joining me today is a longtime friend of the pod, Christine. Welcome back.
So great to be here and looking forward to the year ahead and having a healthy year for all of us.
Absolutely. And I kind of can't believe it's already mid-January. It's like flying. And one of the things that I hear most from people every year, aside from resolutions or whatever diet they're deciding to follow for the new year, they tell everyone that they're doing dry January. Are you hearing this too?
Yeah, my physical therapist today, she said she's going to skip the first week because she's going on a trip, but then the rest of the month will be dry January.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I think the other interesting thing that comes up with this is that I also often get questions about really what are the health implications of drinking. You know, it came up at our live event. We have done many an episode on this podcast. I mean, come to think of it, the very first episode ever of Salad with a Side of Fries was called The Truth About Alcohol. So I figured this January, let's actually dig deeper into this idea of living dry beyond January. So today is going to be part one of this conversation. Christine and I are going to talk about the health benefits of living alcohol-free. And then next week for part two, I have the absolute perfect featured guest to help us through the practical side of leaving alcohol behind. Because full disclosure, Christine and I drink alcohol on occasion.
I love me some sake.
Right. So today is all the health pieces of it. Next week is much more of the practical piece. And if you really are abstaining 100%, Jill, who's joining us, her story is incredible. The things she shares are great. So part one today, part two next week. Before we start, let's tell our members what they're getting this week. So members, your recipe to keep the new year going, your healthiest year yet in 2025, the recipe is for banana bread chia pudding. It is beyond delicious. It's a great choice any time of day, whether you're looking for a snack or a meal. It is so yummy and actually pretty easy to make too. So if you want this recipe, be sure you're a member. Go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries. For just $10 a month, you get weekly recipes, a monthly article or tool, extra discounts from me and our partners, plus access to live Q&A sessions. It's a total deal. I say it all the time. It's a steal. When you take advantage of the full offerings, you save far more than that $10 cost. It's seriously a no-brainer way to show yourself that your health is a priority. Plus, being a member supports this podcast and this community so we can continue to do this with you every week. So remember, all you have to do is go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or actually just click the link in the episode notes because that's a lot easier. Once you're there, you click the little I agree button and then support now, enter your email and payment info, click subscribe, and you're all set. You're going to get this week's recipe for the banana bread chia pudding.
Yum.
I know. I might make it as soon as we finish recording. Okay, Christine, I think maybe the place to start is for us to actually define moderate drinking versus heavy drinking, and then what happens when we drink before we get to the health benefits of not drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so moderate drinking is defined as 1 drink per day for women 2 for men on average. Heavy drinking is more than 1 for women and more than 2 for men. The caveat to that is that there's actually some newer research that shows that binge drinking, meaning maybe it's less often, but when you drink, you're having more than that 1 or 2 respectively, it's potentially even worse for our system. So it's not the total that seems to make the difference, but the pattern, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we could certainly need more research to really understand. But some of the things say they qualify it as episodic. Heavy drinking is more than 5 to 6 alcoholic drinks for men or more than 4 to 5 alcoholic drinks for women on one occasion. And so that qualifies as binge drinking. Now I hear everybody going, well, how much is a drink? Right.
How can I squirm out of this?
Right, exactly. So the technical definition is that 1 drink is qualified as half an ounce of alcohol. That ends up translating into a 12-ounce beer, a 5-ounce glass of wine, or 1.5 ounces of like spirits, right? Distilled spirits, think like your hard liquor. Now, one of the things that in that first episode of Salad with a Side of Fries, where we call The Truth About Alcohol, our primary focus there was on the liver. And everybody can go back to listen to that one, but essentially the liver is not a multitasker. And the liver prioritizes that which is the most toxic. And when we drink alcohol, the liver prioritizes the alcohol. Remember, intoxicated, like alcohol is a toxin. And so the liver prioritizes processing the alcohol out of our system, which pushes down on the priority list other toxins that are in the body, and then other things that the body doesn't necessarily identify as toxins, but it still needs to deal with, like sugar and fats and, other things. So I often think of the real implications of drinking really focused on the liver. But the truth is, it is so much more widespread in our system than that. Before I get to other things, Christine, anything you want to talk about with the liver? Because Christine comes from the Chinese medicine perspective on a lot of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to add was in Chinese medicine, which goes back to the year 200 BC. So we're talking about a long time ago. Yes, it's a toxin, but they also included the emotions. Like it was very holistic back then. And so when you think about the effects that alcohol has on your emotions, then you have to say to yourself, again, back to the 1 drink or 2 drinks for men, am I just having a good time? Is this something that is making me a little bit more social or less shy or making me forget my day? And all that's the appropriate amount. But then when you go beyond that, if you're saying, I've had a really bad day, I can't wait to get home and not only have a drink, but several drinks, they took into account the emotional aspect of it. So there were places in the body that you actually store the energy of the alcohol and the energy of the emotions. And so when you see people who have those little tiny blood vessels on their face that are broken or flushed, or even on your legs, you look down and all of a sudden, the blood vessels are right near the surface. That storage system that the body has for the emotions and for the physical toxins. So to me, it was remarkable that that they had something to say about it from way back when, So again, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, each person has to decide. But at least if you have the information, you can make good decisions.
1,000%. And that's what this is all about, right? It's saying, let's just kind of round out the picture of understanding what it is that the alcohol is doing in the body, what we can expect short-term and long-term from removing the alcohol, and then we get to make our choices. And at least, like you said, at that point, it's an informed choice. So you talked about some of those broken capillaries, and we talked about the liver. You talked about mood. Mood is such a big one because we think that it makes us more fun or we have a good time. And the truth is, in the physiology side, alcohol is a downer. And there are a lot of people who end up like, if you've had the next day that like almost ruminating over what happened the night before, like I remember experiencing this more in my 20s. where you're sort of rethinking the night or piecing it together or whatever. It's like, that's even some of the mood stuff like you're talking about, what it's doing in our brain chemistry. We've talked about it before, but alcohol also impairs our sleep, right? We call it passing out, not sleeping, right? So, the truth is we can connect that, right? If we have impaired sleep, we all know from listening to Salad with a Side of Fries that can have a whole host of health implications, right? Our cognitive health, our mood, our energy, our detoxification, and other ways are, across the board. Another interesting thing is that alcohol suppresses REM sleep, can reduce total sleep time, and might cause you to wake up frequently. Christine, you and I were actually talking about this the other day, that it's almost like you're hot.
Right. That's right. You can pass out pretty easily, for the people who have trouble falling asleep. If you've had some alcohol, sometimes, that part's okay. But then is it an hour and a half later or, whatever those cycles are, that all of a sudden you're throwing your blankets off and you realize, it's because, same thing happens when you eat late, by the way, that heat is not conducive to sleep, for all of you brave hearts that can throw yourself into a cold shower in the middle of the night, realize that, I went back to sleep pretty easily. That's because you cooled off all that heat. So that may not be something that you would think to do, but that just shows what we're talking about, that the extra heat that's circulated. And again, on the surface, you want to be able to be cooler. That's why they say, sleep in a cool room, have the window open a little bit, things like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because all of it just sort of snowballs, right? When we are having these kinds of experiences like you're talking about, even if we think we feel better, the body is recovering far longer than we realize, So there's research that the alcohol slows everything down. So it's why you feel relaxed, actually, because alcohol activates GABA receptors in the brain, which slows down neuron communication, so we feel relaxed, but really the brain has just slowed down. It actually can change the electrical system of the heart, basically. It can change your resting heart rate, weaken the heart muscle. It damages our nerves. You could end up with gut health issues like leaky gut or acid reflux, widespread inflammation. There's actually some research that alcohol consumption has been linked to head, neck, esophagus, liver, breast, colon, and rectum cancers. Oof. Just to name a couple. Good Lord, right?
It's like a L'chaim,
Right, yeah. Even if you drink in excess once a month, it can increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke. Drinking increases the risk of developing dementia by 17% for each additional 7 units of alcohol per week. Oof.
Yeah.
The wild part about some of this, though, is that what it ends up doing in the brain makes us want more alcohol. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a piece, and we've talked about neuroplasticity before, right? This idea that our brain has pathways and the brain can learn new pathways. But just as the brain can learn new pathways that help for healing, the brain learns the pathways of our current behavior. So drinking creates dopamine. And with dopamine, there's a memory of the experience encoded in the brain. What's really interesting is that what's encoded in the brain is also what led you to the alcohol, that trigger. So whether that's the emotion that led you there, the stressful situation, right? The part of what's encoded is that trigger. So let's say, you drank because you're stressed, which I think a lot of us do, and this doesn't necessarily mean that there's inherently a problem, right? I get that. And a lot of us, whether it's with coworkers or whatever, you go for happy hour, you drink to sort of, relieve that stress. Well, the next time you're stressed, the brain can release the dopamine to motivate you to seek out the alcohol. So doing this over and over, we then have this association that starts to queue up earlier and earlier in the process of that stress. It's really interesting because I think there's a lot of pieces to this that we don't totally recognize.
Mm-hmm. There's also the aspect that the experience and the pleasure of the drink, they call it like hijacking your brain in a way.
Yeah.
All that can be a memory. But what is not a memory is the actual act of drinking. So when I took a class with someone discussing this, when people are stopped for driving while intoxicated and they ask them, how many drinks have you had? Oh, officer, 2 or 3. And so the teacher asked us, how many do you think the average? So keep in mind, average, it was 13 drinks. So, and again, they're swerving and they have symptoms. So the police, noticed and, so it to maybe take, but that means some people had 20 drinks if you say average. But the fact that they didn't remember, and the same thing when, you'll talk to Jill about this, I'm sure, but when people sit down to have interventions with people to say, we're worried about you and these are the things we're seeing, the person who's being confronted is in denial, and you can't believe that they wouldn't know what they're doing. We all think we know what we're doing, but the process of drinking and then having your brain hijacked doesn't lay down those memories of the actual drinking. So that to me was like bonkers. Like I just couldn't wrap my brain around it, but evidently that's the process.
Wow, I didn't even know that. That's so interesting. But that also, I think, speaks to what's happening in that moment and how it functions and what serves our survival, right? Like if that stress, if that coping is to some degree a survival mechanism, then like that tracks kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also there's survival of the needing to drink. So again, the difference between needing to drink and actually drinking, if you can think of it as 2 separate activities. So the needing to drink actually then is the survival of that is partly why you don't remember. I think the brain is so imaginative, and it can really, kind of go its own way without you unless you somehow are in the driver's seat.
Yeah, for sure. So with that said, next week, we're going to talk more about some of that practical piece, right? How do we be in that driver's seat, right? How can we make that easier? I want to talk more and shift into some of the short-term benefits of leaving alcohol behind and some of the long-term benefits, but also what we might expect. Because even if you are not necessarily one who drinks every day, right? Maybe you are more of the occasional or casual drinker, as we would say. There can still be some experience of discomfort when trying to remove this coping mechanism, right? Because essentially it is. And the other thing to what we were saying before is that because it hijacks the brain, because it is toxic to the body, because there are these neural pathways that are craving it, even if on occasion, it means that dry beyond January is not quite as simple as saying, oh, no, thank you. So the first thing in terms of short term, what we can expect, I think one of the primary things to recognize is that this can vary person to person dramatically. We want to walk into it informed, but also know that how this experience was for your friend or for me or Christine or anybody has nothing to do with what this might be like for you, so we can all manage our own expectations. According to the American Family Physician, about half of the people who have alcohol use disorder, which is uncontrolled drinking or preoccupation with alcohol, who suddenly drop or cut back on alcohol consumption, will develop signs or symptoms of withdrawal. Mm-hmm. Now, if we recognize that if we are those more occasional or episodic heavy drinkers, that still counts here, So withdrawal symptoms basically happen because the central and autonomic nervous systems are kind of in overdrive, right? You can actually look up, it's called post-acute withdrawal symptoms, or PAWS, PAWS. There's some research that says this impacts about 75% of people. So what might that look like? It might be headache, elevated blood pressure, heart palpitations. Interesting. It's called hyperreflexia, but it's basically when your reflex response from muscles is like overactive. Gastrointestinal upset, nausea and vomiting, insomnia. And then we get to some of the other mood things and brain things. There's hallucinations, agitation, anxiety. You know, in some cases, if we aren't, depending on the severity of, you know, the alcohol use, it is possible that withdrawal symptoms left untreated or unaddressed, somebody could end up experiencing seizures, delirium, even death. And I almost hesitate to say that because it feels dramatic, but I want to make sure that we're aware that depending on the scope and scale of our alcohol use, you know, we can experience some of these withdrawal symptoms and we want to take them seriously. With that said, there are also short-term or the benefits that you might see sooner after eliminating the alcohol. So this is more the stuff like people who, like if you do dry January, right? These are the kinds of things that you might start to see in that first month or two. So the liver function can certainly improve. It's possible that liver fat could decrease by up to 20% in that first few weeks. Improved digestion, so think acid reflux, nutrient absorption, improved immune health, reduced blood pressure, lower your heart rate, your resting heart rate, increased energy, improved insulin response, improved mood, reduced risk of accidents and injuries, weight loss or maintenance, clearer skin, reduced risk of cancer-related growth factors, mental clarity, improved sleep, right? All of this stuff we can start to see if we're paying attention to it, you know, in those first few weeks.
A friend of mine she became a runner, but before that, I didn't realize how much alcohol she consumed. And when we used to run together, she would tell me these stories, you know, because people do this in secret sometimes. And when she stopped drinking, she lost 8 pounds.
Yeah.
And it was just it's the sugar and also, you know, maybe you're
inflammation.
Right. You're uninhibited. So you end up eating more fries than salads, let's say.
I'm feeling called out. It's all out of love, right?
Yes.
But that actually reminds me too of, did you ever see the movie Brittany Runs a Marathon?
No.
So great movie. And she, in the story, like she's really obsessed with losing weight. And then she sort of lets that go and decides that she's going to run a marathon. And then over the course of training for the marathon, she was making other health supporting choices because it improved her run or it made her feel better when she was running. So she didn't want to drink one night because she had a long run or an early run the next day. You know, she ended up hanging out more with her running friends than with her other friends. And so it's so interesting how we can make one choice and see it snowball.
Mm-hmm. I remember exactly that experience. It felt like your taste buds were changing.
For sure.
You wanted lighter foods, you know, healthier foods, you know, so maybe not the extra cheese on the pizza that I used to have when I was more sedentary. So, you know, it felt kind of magical, but I think a lot of people have had that experience.
Yeah, for sure. And if you are one of the social or moderate drinkers, that first month, like you might not notice all these other physiological effects, but more of what we're saying in terms of the mood and that sense of control or that sense of accomplishment in sticking to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to point out, like, I think that is just as powerful of an experience as these other physiological things.
Yeah.
We just have to decide to notice it, I think.
Yeah, you pat yourself on the back. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right, I want to shift into the longer term benefits. So if we decide now we're getting to really like the drive beyond January part. So really quick, though, let's take a break to highlight our partner for this episode. Friends, if you're a fan of Salad with a Side of Fries podcast and looking for how you can support us, we've got you covered with our awesome merchandise. So maybe this is the perfect reminder of your commitment to your health. Maybe it's an anchor to help you remember your Dry Beyond January commitment, right? It's a tool to help keep you going. So we have some new items that were from the holidays. A gym bag that says muscle dictates metabolism. We also have that phrase on shirts. We have magnets that say protein and fiber, lots of things out there. The bento box for lunch is also awesome if you are committing to bringing food with you places this new year. And remember, whether you're, you just want a small token or something bigger, there are tons of options. And of course, you still get to choose if you are hashtag team salad or hashtag team fries. I say you owe it to yourself and the people around you to check out the merch store, purchase something that supports the show, but most importantly, supports your health. And maybe it sparks a conversation so you can pay it forward and help somebody else make 2025 their healthiest year yet. So simply text the word fries, FRIES, to 844-947-4846. You'll receive the link right to your phone. Check out the full Salad with a Side of Fries merch store. Your purchase supports all the work we do here, shows your podcast pride, and like I said, maybe sparks a conversation so you can pay it forward, inspiring someone else to reclaim their health too. So again, simply text the word fries, FRIES, to 844-947-4846. This is a toll-free number. Standard text and data rates may apply. Okay, long-term health benefits of living alcohol-free, right? When we think about the gut and the liver, essentially, we are improving our immune system. When we reduce the inflammation, because the alcohol caused the inflammation, we really see a decreased risk factor of virtually every sickness, illness, disease, or symptom, right? So the research allows us to say lower risk of liver disease, reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, lowers the risk of certain types of cancer, improved cognitive function and memory, reduced risk of alcohol dependence and withdrawal symptoms. Well, duh. Okay. Improved mental health, reduced risk of depression and anxiety, increased life expectancy. I mean, there is nothing on there that makes you go, well, maybe not.
I want to live shorter.
Right. It's funny because we think that it's serving us. And I do think, there is a fine line to say, what is serving our stress, right? I think there is a benefit to having tools in your tool belt that support de-stressing. I just think we want to balance that and say, is this the tool that we want to emphasize, or are there other tools in our tool belt? Because for a lot of us, it does work to reduce stress. It just also comes with a host of other implications.
Mm-hmm. I think if you combine skin and kidneys, neither of which you really mentioned except for the blood pressure part, that in the winter especially, which is what we're talking about January and beyond, that alcohol, because of that heating you up the way we were talking about with sleep, it also dries you out. So I'm sure most of us have had the experience, especially when you wake up in the middle of the night, your mouth is so dry, your eyes are so dry. Well, guess what? Your skin is also so dry. And so, that's another benefit of not drinking, is to be able to keep some of the moisture in your skin. The skin is a barrier. Yes, it's a beauty thing as well, but it's also a barrier to things not coming into your body. And so you want the integrity of your skin not to have little cracks and little calluses and little from the dryness. And so, it's not something that you might think of right away that not drinking would help that, but it definitely is a piece of all this. And also, in addition to your liver having to detoxify you, the kidneys also are kind of overworked with this, and they're much more delicate. The liver can regrow itself, for Christ's sake, but the kidneys are really delicate. And so you really don't want to have toxins or poisons running through them all day long to kind of get rid of, like, what we're trying to do is get rid of the poison. So we might be sweating it out. It might come out in your urine. Anytime there's an odor in your urine, you can rest assured, again, this is back to Chinese medicine, that there's some heat in your body, and heat and inflammation are pretty much the same thing. So anyway, these are things that you can benefit as well. And you might not have noticed or associated it with your drinking habits.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're saying that, I'm also thinking, so drying, dehydrating, I didn't mention this before, but alcohol depletes our electrolytes.
Mm-hmm.
As we've talked about before too, hydration is about more than just water. It's about minerals. Electrolytes are minerals, right? So there's a piece of that. Wrinkles, aging, physical signs of aging are often from dehydration or lack of moisture in the skin. So there's all of those pieces together. And you talked about also the liver regenerating. I mean, depending on how much damage, the liver is amazing. It can regenerate in depending on the damage, maybe pretty significantly in even 3-4 weeks. Mm-hmm. Certainly beyond that, it can regenerate and repair with the understanding that also depending on how much damage there was, it may not be as healthy or efficient as it your initial, the liver you were born with. But it's such a snowball too, because if we start to think about, like we were starting to say before the break, we are spending less time nursing that headache. We're spending less time, feeding these stress responses and then coping and, recovering. Less time, maybe not initially, but over time, less time thinking about the alcohol or those social plans or ruminating over what happened, and we're sleeping better. It's like all of a sudden, not so all of a sudden, there's an incredible amount of mental capacity as well as physical energy for things that are important to you. I often say to people too, when I work with somebody on the weight management piece, it's like all of that mental space that's taken up by keeping track of what you're eating when we're not writing it down and we keep track of it in our head, or the space that has been used up till now, beating us up over some choice that we made. Like, where could all of that mental capacity go? And how amazing would it be if all of us had all of that brain power and all of that capacity to put toward connection and community and making things better for ourselves and each other and our families and all of these things? Like, there's a piece of it that is so powerful and hopeful that I think can be very easily overlooked.
Mm-hmm. It's a form of self-love.
Yeah. I'm looking through my notes and it's just, I'm laughing because everything here is the long-term health effects. Right? Health benefits is essentially the opposite of everything that we started with.
Not dying.
Right. Exactly. Not dying. Some other considerations. We've talked a lot about the health things. How much do you think the average American household spends on alcohol a year?
That was another one where I think it was called Simple Living, something like that. It was a course that I took, and they were describing, and the guy had no idea, and it was like $400 a month is what he was spending on alcohol. And that he just had again, where does the memory neurons go? But it just doesn't register. So I'm not going to say 400, but what is it?
Okay, so according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2019, the average household spent about 1% of their income, 1% of their annual income, which for the average household is $579 a year.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Which makes sense. But also, that's just on the alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Add to that social settings, right? Like wine, since the pandemic, actually all alcoholic beverages since the pandemic have gotten so expensive. Like, it's not wild to have a $30 glass of wine on a restaurant menu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you add to the cost of that, where you're drinking. Now, 2019, by the way, that was pre-pandemic. Right. So that's not quite as recent as it sounded in my head initially, But the cost of the social situations, maybe it's food also, maybe it's the other activities, plus transportation,
mm-hmm.
these days with Uber and Lyft and those kinds of rideshare things being all over, it's not just a city thing where you could take public transportation or a taxi or something, right? Like that's really anywhere, which I think on the plus side can reduce driving under the influence, but it adds to the cost of choosing to drink. So one of the other benefits longer term is to say, where could we put all that money? I wouldn't go so far as to say that for, my generation and the generation behind me, that's why we don't own homes, but what could we do with that?
Yeah. I mean, a nice vacation for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in for that. Where should we go?
Yeah.
Right? I'm making plans, friend.
Yeah.
So similar on that front, one of the other things that the research talks about is improved relationships. Because while for a lot of people, we can think that it might be more difficult because there are those friends that we meet for drinks. It's really the case that what the research shows is that family and friends, when there's the presence of alcohol, there is greater conflict. And so even if we're socially drinking and we think it's boosting our mood and maybe helping us bond with others, there's also a piece of saying, what in our relationships could improve work, home, family, friends, health, all these things, right? If we aren't experiencing the same anxiety, we aren't experiencing the same depression, and we actually can show up with greater self-esteem. And feeling better physically. I mean, think about how your mood is different when you're hungover than when, you wake up feeling rested and energized.
A little irritable.
Right. And then one of the other things that I often hear from people, especially I'm single, I have friends who are single, and in dating, and I said this in that first episode of Salad with a Side of Fries, I was like, well, I guess you could date sober, Which I do think it is so much more common now for people to not drink. Actually, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine. He works in like spirit sales. Like he sells, from liquor companies to restaurants in the hospitality industry. And he was saying the younger generation, like the 30 and under, they don't drink. They don't really go out socially, right, to restaurants. That's not how they hang out. And so there are elements of that that's really hopeful, when we think about, that they aren't necessarily as big of drinkers as millennials and other generations. But there's also something sad about that for the hospitality industry, But one of the things, going back to the whole dating thing, is that we also see that removing alcohol may actually improve your sex life. So a lot of times people will say, couples will say, oh, but when, after we've had a drink or two, it tends to help our sex life. So interestingly, though, we also have seen it, most people, right, where excessive alcohol can impair function. So women's sex drive can drop. The vagina can get drier. With the circulation issues, men have a harder time keeping an erection. So cutting down on the alcohol actually can stir up the romance when everybody can function better, So it's just something to think about. There's such a dramatic difference, I think, between our perception and then the reality of what's actually happening when alcohol is in the mix.
It's a cultural thing, really.
Yeah.
I remember pajama parties, say, in college, where it was girls, all girls. And, if alcohol was involved, at first we're all kind of giggly and laughing and making jokes. And within an hour or two, I remember observing, my mother doesn't love me. And all of a sudden everyone was crying. And I would look, and it was almost like you could time it, And so, again, in terms of the cultural ideas of what alcohol is and then what the reality of it is, it definitely is false advertising as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, we actually talk about that with Jill next week. So a little teaser there for everybody. So I think, the long and the short of it for part one here is you decide for you. if living dry beyond January is something that you want to play with. And I'm approaching it that way, literally as play. And let's see. With that said, as I say to all of my clients, and I'm going to say to everybody here, we get healthier each day we keep alcohol away. Christine, a final thought to wrap this up?
No, I think it really is this idea that you bring everything to the prefrontal cortex is the front of your brain, and that's where you make all your decisions and things. And so to have your decisions about alcohol coming from something that makes sense, like everything we've just talked about, everything that makes sense in terms of your health, as opposed to the emotional, which is kind of the middle of the brain, and we're kind of being led around by our emotions to say, wait a second, I'm going to step back and make a decision that there are other ways to deal with your emotions. There are other things you can do. There are other tools, even just taking deep breaths, whatever it is that, and then to also just be curious. Like when you think about play, what happens when you go to the office parties or the birthdays or things that people are having, and you just observe what alcohol is doing to other people, and you can't do that if you're in the mix. Like if you can just stand back a little and just be curious, not judgmental, but just like, oh, wow, like I can see the difference in that person who is usually really shy, and now they're up on the table with a lampshade on their head. So to just be curious and to also give yourself some grace, in terms of when you make decisions on a day-to-day basis, some of them will be for the long-term good and some of them are the short-term needs, and just give yourself some grace about that.
1,000%. And I think it's worth also sharing, if you feel like you need extra support, if you feel like, you are one of those people where alcohol is super challenging for you, or you're in the moment and you need support, there's a 24/7 national helpline. It's 1-800-662-HELP. So 1-800-662-4357 is the national helpline. I recognize what we are sharing here is not the kind of support that might really best serve you. So reach out. There are tons of resources available.
Yeah.
All right. Christine, shall we preview our nutrition nugget?
Yes.
All right. So this week's bonus episode nutrition nugget is all about dates. So this came up in our Q&A episode at the start of the year, and it's actually been on my list for a very long time. So I promised everybody we will talk about dates sooner rather than later. So that's coming up on this Friday's nutrition nugget bonus episode. And the reason, by the way, why it came up in our Q&A episode is because dates and date paste are used as sweeteners in a lot of healthier recipes. So the question was like, well, are they actually healthier? And what's the story? So we're going to get into all of it. Be sure, click the follow or the plus sign on the app where you're listening, and then your app will alert you when the Nutrition Nugget is live on Friday morning. As always, I'm Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. I love hearing from you. This is the easiest way to also learn more about working with me as your health coach. Christine, thank you again for being here.
A pleasure.
Always appreciate you. And if you are not already friends, join our membership program by going to glow.fm/saladwithasideofries. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, and most importantly, it supports your health. And you'll get this week's recipe for the banana bread chia pudding. Until next week, remember, think about what role alcohol plays in your life. Is it purely social? Do you truly enjoy it? Does it serve you? And consider if it's worth exploring dry beyond January. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.